everyone, welcome back. We're going to talk about the Cotton Club and Duke Ellington, a huge name associated with the history of jazz. In order to orient ourselves a little bit and to make sure that you guys know exactly what I'm talking about, I'm going to go ahead and pull my lecture notes back up. Here we go. So the Cotton Club. The Cotton Club is a premier jazz venue in 1920 in New York City. And because it's not a speakeasy and because it is not, under the scrutiny of the law, despite being owned by a mobster, it's going to also be a venue that is capable of being reviewed and also appears in the New Yorker, publicized very often as a part of their nightlife column. Mostly by a woman who goes by or went by the name of Lipstick. She's down here. Really interesting figure. She wrote a column called Table for Two, which was a body, very not vulgar in terms of language, but suggestive, most certainly, especially for the 1920s. And she was, the columnist who was mostly in charge of reporting about nightlife in New York City. And in as much, the Cotton Club comes about in a number of times in her reviews. Before we get to her in a little bit more detail, I want to talk about the Cotton Club in particular. So its location is in Harlem, and Harlem, as we reviewed from part one, is going to be the epicenter of Black culture in New York City in the 1920s, and also a hot spot for the music community and budding music genre of jazz. Duke Ellington was more or less the house band. Duke Ellington and his orchestra were more or less the house band members that were a part of the Cotton Club. He wrote well over 100 standards for the venue itself. And, being a big name is one thing, but one thing that is going to perpetuate your name is going to be performing a lot. And so while Duke Ellington was massively successful as an individual artist, he does owe a little bit of gratitude to the Cotton Club, which was distastefully modeled after a Southern style plantation, just to give you kind of an idea of the time, still really coming in strong from obviously the pre-1920s, very, very apparent institutionalized racism that's happening, and sort of tip of the hat to Southern culture. But in any case, the Cotton Club was the premier spot to hear Black artists, and that's pretty much all that they booked. So it was known as later it was known as a black and tan, which meant that it had audiences of mixed races. And before that point, and by the way, that was all owed to Duke Ellington, the clientele originally was all white until Duke Ellington was like, hey, I think it's time that we incorporated Black audience. And again, the venue, it's a very symbiotic relationship. The venue owes a lot to the performers that are also performing there. So the owner was happy to oblige Duke Ellington in his request. And it was a major move for venues at the time, which were really not only segregated, if that, but also exclusive to particular audiences, which is really incredibly unfair when the talent is of the audience makeup that you are restricting from the performance venue in the first place. Again, this time has captivated a number of thinkers, educators, and filmmakers, and so there's a plethora of documentaries about the 1920s. I have two small snippets that are concentrated in their discussion about the Cotton Club and Duke Ellington that I'd like to pull up, followed by a couple performances of Duke Ellington in action, because he's really something as not only a performer, but a band leader and also a composer. So let me go ahead and pull up our documentary clips.
White gangsters controlled Harlem's nightlife. They barred black customers and lured white patrons with bootleg liquor. In 1925, Ellington and Greer and a six-piece band they now called the Washingtonians were playing a Times Square speakeasy, the Kentucky Club, when they were spotted by an enterprising song publisher.
One day, I went down to a little club, and the boss said to me, Mills, I've got a new band just came in from Washington. Let me know what you think of them. I heard the band, and I knew immediately this is the band that I want to build up for the best black band in the country. And when the Cotton Club agreed to put in a girly show, the manager said, what about the orchestra? And I said, I've got a perfect combination, a small combination, but I will add men and make a 12-piece band out of a 6-piece band.
The Cotton Club. Let's see. Oh, yes, I remember. It was a day of audition, and I think it was about 4 or 5 bands were auditioning. And everybody was supposed to be there at noon, and we didn't get there till 3 o'clock. And everybody had been there and auditioned and left, and we came at 3, and we got the job. And the reason we got it was because the guy who says yes or no, he was late, too. Some of the fellows around there didn't have very high hopes for our staying there. The waiters were giving odds on us getting thrown out after 3 or 4 days or something like that. And we stayed there 5 years.
Our famous Cotton Club. Right.
Really quick aside, that was Duke Ellington in his older years speaking to us, and he's also the very virtuosic and charismatic character who is playing the piano. So watch out for him in this second part of the same documentary.
I see so many friends here tonight enjoying themselves in spite of the cover charge. If you can spare a minute from your merrymaking, I'd like to have the pleasure of introducing the greatest living master of jungle music, the rip-roaring harmony hound, none other than Duke Ellington. Take your bow, Dukey.
What I do, what I do, da da do, da da do.
They used to have a saying, Harlem was heaven. When you come to New York, if you didn't see the Cotton Club, you ain't seen nothing. They had the most gorgeous colored girls. They had the best colored talent in the world. That was the Cotton Club.
It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing.
Now here's a beautiful show with the great Duke Ellington Orchestra. Beautiful showgirls, beautiful dancing girls, great acts, all black show. And the only people who would come in to see the show were all white people. So I used to think, I was very young then, I was thinking about this, and I asked my parents, what's happening? Here we are, the all-black show, and only white people come here to see the show.
And, you know, Duke Ellington asked that very same question. Because he asked that question, he was able to, you know, really rally for Black audiences to also be incorporated into the Cotton Club. They weren't the first venue to do that, but certainly as a venue of a huge and notable size and reputation, that was a big move. The jungle dances were really commonplace in the Cotton Club and other Cotton Club like venues. This idea of a, you know, not a burlesque act, no one is undressing, but it's, you know, a combination of fancy footwork, it's going to lay the groundwork for the popularity of the Charleston style of dance, as you can kind of see based on that video. But before we leave that choreographed element, I do have another clip of Duke Ellington and his orchestra from later on a film, which really does give a clearer view, certainly in terms of quality, of the kind of dance and music that were combined together in the 1920s. So let me go ahead and pull it up.
Ladies and gentlemen, I got a little surprise for you. You all know our star's been sick for quite some time. Well, she's better now, and I'm going to have her come out here and do a little dance for you. The inimitable Freddie Washington. Let's go, Duke.
So again, very indicative of the time and what was really popular. These jungle dances made frequent appearances at the Cotton Club and beyond. I want to talk again a little bit about another, or the importance of reporting, especially when it comes to major New York venues. That's still a trend that is in place today, that reviews hold an important part, not only for artists when they put forth an album or are on tour and put forth a performance or series of performances, but also, for venues, and are very important in ensuring the popularity of a venue. And so I want to talk a little bit about the New Yorker, which interestingly enough, begins its existence in 1925. Really, strange change of the times in terms of a new generation that's emerging. We have a lot of sort of youth culture rebellion that is happening in the 1920s. And what I thought was so striking in terms of thinking about the 20s is thinking about the older generation that is certainly still alive and kicking, that were really a part of when, they're holding on to their youth, and their days of youth are pre-1900. And so when you think about points of fashion and stuff, what exists pre-flapper days are the exact opposite. This idea of the Gibson girl, these long hairdos, updos of extravagance, real puff sleeves, accentuated curves. And in the 1920s, we start favoring a more androgynous look for women, specifically talking about the video that we just watched. That was a ideal body type at that time, was to be sort of somewhat hipless, to have a very straight kind of figure, which is very different than what is preferred now, right? The idea of, Kim Kardashian or whatever being the ideal body type with super tiny waist and, big boobs, big butt. That was not the beauty standards have obviously changed over time. That was not the case in the 1920s. The idea is was to be boxy, to be like ideally flat chested, not super flat chested, but to be like more modest and more androgynous. The idea of also women's hairstyles being the preference going from long to short, the bob coming into style, which was really, really popular for flappers. In addition to this, this drop waist style of dresses, which are going to be, again, very different from what's happened earlier than the 1920s. And again, I mentioned this because Louis Long, otherwise known as Lipstick, is the, emblematic flapper. She's this, single woman who's enjoying a nightlife style a la Sex and the City in the 1920s. And alongside of her, some of her colleagues are still rocking the fashion points of the previous era. So we have this idea of the Gibson girl almost alongside of the more revolutionary flapper. And, these are really, rebellious times for the youth in the 1920s. I want to pull up a little bit of footage of her before I leave her as a point of conversation. So really, I think illustrated picture of what happens in New York in the 1920s and maybe the impact on Lipstick's advertisement of the New York nightlife. And coming from a woman with a really body sense of humor and, sort of suggestive language was revolutionary for the time. So I like to make sure to cover her in particular. For those of you who have a subscription to the New Yorker, they have a really wonderful archive of their past issues online, including things that go back all the way to the 1920s. So if you're interested in Lois Lipstick or other reporting that happened in the 20s or even later into the 30s, etc., it's all online on their website, which again, very, very helpful and kind of cool as a time capsule document. I'm going to pull up my lecture notes just to preview our discussion for parts 3 and 4. We are going to talk about Fletcher Henderson and Clarence Williams, two other very prominent big band leaders that were a part of the scene in the 1920s in New York. We're going to talk about George Gershwin very briefly. He had an important composition in the 20s that was an interesting fusion between classical and jazz, and really did invite jazz into the serious music concert hall. And we'll also take a listen to Thomas Fats Waller, representing sort of Harlem stride style. So for part 3, we're going to talk about, like I said, Fletcher Henderson and Clarence Williams, focusing our attention on the big band tradition that is very vibrant in the 1920s in New York. So I will see you back for part 3 shortly.